Ariel from the Ladies Talking Love podcast joins to talk about how women can live up to their sexual potential and become equal partners in their relationship. In this podcast, we talk about four common barriers that interfere with sexual development and how to overcome them. You don't want to miss it. If you're like me, you know your mind can be your best or your worst friend. Our mind is an amazing tool that can do incredible things, but our mind can also create problems out of nowhere. Sometimes our mind keeps recommending the same solutions to problems even when they aren't working. I see this pattern play out as individuals try to overcome their anxiety, depression, or even struggles with pornography, using approaches that make sense but aren't very helpful. This podcast will show you how real researchers and clinicians are changing the way we approach mental health and reveal helpful research-supported principles designed to help real people with real problems. My name is Dr. Cameron Staley, and welcome to the Life After Series Radio. Everyone, I'm delighted to introduce our guest for this conversation. Ariel hosts the Ladies Talking Love podcast, and we had a chat. It's been a while back now on your podcast about ways to navigate pornography concerns in relationships. And that was actually one of my favorite chats I've had on that topic. I've talked about that topic so many times, but there was something about the conversation we had that I thought was really meaningful. So I really enjoyed that. So I'm really excited to have you on my podcast. And just really appreciate your insights and perspective in that last chat. So thanks for joining.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
Wonderful. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about you and your journey and how you got into becoming a sex educator?
Yeah, so I am Ariel Finlinson and I just finished my master's degree in May. I have four young little kids and married to my husband Kyle. We live in Logan, Utah at the moment. Um, but yeah, I feel like this journey, I mean, talking about it, it's like it's been my whole life, right? Like how I was
Yeah.
shaped as a youth and as a child, and just like all these beliefs that kind of came to a head after getting married that I didn't even realize were affecting the way I came into my sexuality in my
Mm,
adulthood and then in my marriage. And I feel like somehow deep down, I just always had this belief that my sexual relationship with my husband could be really good, but it wasn't.
mm,
And I just had this belief that it could be. And so I feel like that just drove me to like read books and talk about things and just kind of seek out answers of why this is so hard, especially for women. And that just kept coming up that it felt like I was the only one who must have a hard time in my sex life as
Oh,
a woman, and it came up like, "No, this is just so huge, and
yeah.
so many women struggle." And so, as I went along this journey and learned more, I decided it was time to go back to school and get a little more education, and especially as a mom of young kids, I needed that dedicated time to focus because without it, it's hard to make it happen. And then to be able to share what I've learned and I think can be transformational for relationships and especially for women showing up in their married relationships.
I love it. So it's been a lifelong journey. And so you notice like messages that have been there all along, kind of shaping, following you, kind of came with you into your marriage. And it's like, you know what? This can be better. And so you put a lot of work into this then to
This
figure it out
it's
for your own
yeah.
relationship, both personally and also professionally. It's like I got to figure this out. Things can be better.
Yeah, and it was just so incremental. It's hard to like pinpoint a moment, but I really want to take all these things that I've learned that are so common for so many of us with the cultural influence, sometimes religious teachings, just the ways we view sex in our society and women and men, and just all of these gender roles can really affect us, and we might not even realize it. So I wanted to gather all of that information and make it more accessible so that people don't have to go through the
Yeah.
years of incremental learning, but be able to access it and start to make changes right away.
And that's the part that feels unnecessary. Like it shouldn't be that difficult for everybody every time. It's like
Right.
there's some commonalities in these messages that's coming from society and culture and family and religious teachings that if we could start to name them and organize them, we could help prepare people. This could be like we could cross through these developmental stages a little bit more smoothly and enjoy them without having all that hardship.
Agreed. Oh, yep, that's so true.
So why don't you fill us in on some of those? What are some of those messages that you've come across that really interfere with people's sexual development and fulfillment, particularly for women? Because I think men and women get different messages that impact us in different ways. But what are some of those you've seen that really impact women?
Yeah, no, I love this question. And before jumping in, I just wanted to say that over the years, as I've dived more into this topic, I have just really come to believe that women are living below their potential for
Mm,
the joy and fulfillment that we have in our sexual relationship with our spouse. And I do believe that sex should be something that happens in a married relationship as from my religious background, but I just have come to really believe that if we can shift some of these things, women can realize the potential they have. But we don't know how to live up to it because no one has talked about it. And
mm.
it's not something that comes naturally because of these societal things and other things going on. So I wanted to kind of narrow it down to talk today to some of the four main things. There's more we could talk about, but I think some of the top ones are not understanding desire, that oftentimes as women we don't understand what desire looks like, what it
Mm.
is. The second one is just kind of this idea of sex being more about male pleasure and
Oh,
more
yeah.
about men.
Yep.
um, the third one is that we as women need to serve others, and not that that's a bad thing, because I think it's great to serve other people, but it gets to a point for a lot of women, especially from religious backgrounds, that we don't even know ourselves anymore, and we just give so much that we aren't in touch with our needs and wants, and so sex then becomes this place of serving again, where it's just
Oh,
for our spouse, which is really a horrible way to enjoy it
yeah.
if you're like,
Further depleting. It's
always
just
just for
giving
you.
the
Yes.
last little bit I have left. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think goes against what it can be. Like I believe that it can be rejuvenating for women as
Absolutely.
well. And then the fourth one is just this definition of sex that we have, how we understand sex, often leaves out the way that women can actually enjoy sex in their bodies. So
I want to hear more. And I love how you frame that, where women are living below their potential. It's like, oh my goodness. Like what a like an affirming and encouraging statement, but also like what is the potential? Like what can you accomplish? What are those things getting in the way? So let's focus on each of those. I want to hear more about those.
okay, yeah, let's dive in with the first one, just not understanding desire. So, a lot of women over the years, desire is a huge issue, especially coming into long term relationships. There's research by a lady named Rosemary Basson. But anyway, she, like, this whole entire view of sexuality kind of came from Masters and Johnson. And we have this, this little hill design of like you're aroused and then you reach this point that it's released in orgasm and then you come back down and so this kind of idea, and she went in and she's like, this isn't what I'm seeing for women. We are missing something here.
Yeah.
And so she just went in and did more research and just realized, especially for women in long-term relationships, their desire isn't just this thing that's going to fall on you like a magic pixie dust, right? Like it's not something that suddenly, which for a lot of men, this is what we see. This is what we
Yeah.
see as normal, is like you see your wife get out of the shower and you're like, all right, let's do this. Like
Yeah.
I want to have sex. But that's not how it is for women. For most women, it can be. So if you are that, that's awesome. Embrace it. We each have different desire styles, but just realizing that often for women, desire is a choice, and it might be instigated by something like love or wanting more connection or having a deep conversation or laughing and being playful. And then you make this choice that you want to be more intimate. And so you start to move into that mood and move into fostering your arousal and desire. It's not something that just falls on you. And I think this can be really helpful for men as well, because there are men who have what is often termed as like responsive desire. Um, and it feels like you're broken because
Yeah.
our whole life it's like spontaneous, right? That's what we view desire as. So a lot of women think they're broken because they don't experience spontaneous desire. And if a man doesn't, he's like, I don't eat. What's wrong with me? So
Yep.
it's just this cycle of realizing that desire can look different and it can be a choice. You don't have to wait for desire to hit you. You can foster it in your relationship.
So that seems really big to think about desire as a choice and not just like this linear stage that Masters and Johnson's put out there that it starts with desire and then we have
Right.
arousal. Like that model works for some, like you said, but often for women, it doesn't really follow that. But just hearing you say desire can be a choice, it feels empowering. It feels hopeful, but I also feel a sense of, well, now you're responsible. There's something that you need to maybe do about this, some
Yeah.
actions to take that you just can't like, well, I don't have desire.
Too
Sorry.
bad.
And you're saying
Yeah.
this is a choice, something that you can foster, something that you can work towards.
Yeah, and it takes exploration. It's going to take exploration for all of us to kind of figure out what are those things that are going to help you move into the mood. And Emily Nagoski, she's a really famous sex educator, but she talks about that even with Masters and Johnson's, like it starts with desire. um View that actually for everyone, she argues, it starts with arousal, but everybody's arousal
Mm,
threshold is at a different spot. And so
yeah,
someone with spontaneous desire, their arousal is going to be initiated like right off the bat, and desire happens pretty much at the same time.
yeah.
But for someone else who's more responsive desire, you get to foster that arousal, and once your arousal threshold gets to a spot where it hits desire, that's when you're going to feel the actual like desire coming of like, I want to be intimate with my partner. And that could be after hours of, a nice text from your partner who's coming home from work, getting some alone time after the kids are in bed,
Yep.
uh, a back rub, a nice laughing game of, I don't know, whatever you want to play, like a board game or chess, if that's your thing, whatever. And it can just kind of build. And once then physical arousal can be a part of this, right? Like kissing, making out, and just kind of moving into more intimate touch, and that's when that desire can come. So it doesn't even have to come before you start an intimate encounter per se, but just knowing that you can get there and being able to learn and practice what's going to help me reach that arousal threshold that reaches desire, and what's going to get me there, and just kind of practicing. So it does take some work, but once you figure it out, then you can get yourself into the mindset and help your partner know as well, like, oh, this is what helps me. So you both get to start using that to move the person into the mood,
I love that. I don't think that message is in any Hollywood movie that I've ever seen.
right?
And yet it's like, oh, even just that awareness would be like, oh, I understand this. Now I need to learn about this. This is a skill I can cultivate. There's potentially a reliable pathway to desire, but it's going to require some exploration, some conversation, and some effort. But it's not something that's outside of my control.
Yeah, and I think it can be so frustrating, especially with what we see in love movies or
Yeah,
books, right? Like it's like desire is just there and you shouldn't
just
have to work
works.
for it, right? And so it
Yeah,
makes it feel I think one of the barriers that I've had to work through is reminding myself that it's not like unromantic. It's not saying that like my desire is less than because I
yeah.
get to practice moving into the mood. It's actually a beautiful thing to know that my
Mhm.
partner knows my desire and wants to help me foster that, instead of just being like, well, I guess you don't have desire, too bad. That we get to work together because we care about each other. And that's a big part of a relationship, right? Is learning about each other, and moving into the unknown can be a hard thing, but a really beautiful growing thing as well.
And that's what I like about that perspective is it makes us more than just our anatomy. It's like there's a human in there and a relationship part, and that's the part that's intimate and connecting. Our body just doesn't respond, and then we go at it. It's like no, there's more to this, and so I really like that perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. No, thank you. And then we can move on to number two, just believing that sex is more about men. And this touches a lot on desire, right? What we've already been talking about is a lot of what is portrayed about sexuality is this spontaneous desire. It's which is about men because that's usually where men fall in. Not all men, but the majority of men kind of fall into this spontaneous desire. And so when women don't have as much desire over the centuries, whatever years, we've kind of been labeled as less sexual. And so this view of women being less sexual and men being more sexual and their desire being spontaneous and even in some areas might be viewed as uncontrollable, right? Like
Yeah.
it becomes this view that we as women need to fulfill this need of men because sex is about them and about their needs. And so that really right that really takes out the desire that could be fostered for women if you are feeling like it's something that you have to do to keep your partner fulfilled. And in extreme cases, and sometimes in the way things maybe modesty was taught growing up or things like that, it can get to an extreme of feeling like if you don't fulfill this need, and if you're on the podcast, this is in quotes because it's not a need, like, if you don't fulfill this, then my husband is going to have an affair or he's
Yeah.
going to look
Ooh.
at pornography. It's so which fear is the worst way to enjoy sex. And so just and going from that like more far view, but just believing that sex is more about men because their anatomy and their desire is usually portrayed as being higher just really limits women's ability to believe and see that sex can be about them and can be just as important for them and that they could be the focus. Because I mean, just thinking about like the end, right? In most sexual encounters, it usually ends after ejaculation, right? And so just by like how sex is practiced in a lot of our relationships, it's like, I guess this isn't about me because I guess we're done. Okay. So just a lot of these kind of views around sex focus it on men and makes it really hard to believe that we have a place and that it can be important
Yeah.
for us.
Yeah. Listening to you talk, I don't know if I've had this experience, but I tried to put myself in that female perspective, hearing what you said, and like sex, as you described it, felt like such a duty where it's like, it felt like something comparable to taking out the trash or scooping up the poop in the backyard or doing the dishes. It's like those are things like, oh, I guess I gotta do, but I'm not interested. They're not that fun or fulfilling. And then if my relationship's contingent on just doing those things, yeah, there's gonna be some resentment and
Yeah.
there's a lot of fear tactics, but like I'm not gonna desire like go in the backyard scooping the poop. Like
Right?
that's not a fun activity. But then if you threaten me and it causes resentment, it's like I gotta do it. I don't see where there's any space for that spontaneous desire to show up or desire like I really want to work on this and find a love for scooping the poop in the backyard. Like none of that sound appealing.
Right.
And it's like I can't see how I would be wanting to approach that and work on that. It just yeah, like it just felt like such a duty and responsibility, everything counter to connection, fulfillment, pleasure, enjoyment.
Totally. And even just looking at it like in most of the way we view male sexuality versus female sexuality, like men are often portrayed as the aggressors. And I don't necessarily, it could be in a negative way, but I don't necessarily mean that as a negative either, just like as the ones who are pursuing, right?
Yeah, like
Like in,
initiating.
yeah. And in like dating, right? Like traditional views would be
Yep.
like the man needs to ask for marriage, just all of
Yep.
these things. And so when you go into a relationship, and those are a lot of the views we have, is that men are the initiators of sexual encounters. Like even if as a woman you might have a higher desire spontaneously for sexual intimacy, like you sometimes feel like you have to wait because it's not proper. It's not proper for you as
Yep.
a woman to be the one initiating, to be wanting sex. That's not womanly, right? Like you're there's a lot of negative words that are portrayed for women who like sex or want to enjoy sex. And so there's so many of these messages that come in that make it really hard as a woman to be like, no, I can enjoy this and it can be a beautiful, connecting, even holy thing if that's part of your faith tradition, to make this in my relationship, but it can be really hard to believe that because
Oh, yeah.
of all these blocks that are coming up for you.
Yep. Yeah, those barriers, those little break, slow it down things are everywhere, and those messages are generational.
Yeah,
And so they're so universal. It's like we don't even hear them, we don't even see them. They're just there. But yeah, the way you frame that, it's like sexual experiences are male centric,
yeah.
and that's just what they're there for. And like there wouldn't be much pleasure derived from that. It's not even for you.
Yeah, yeah. Yep, I feel like this is a question that you were going to ask me later on, but I might just bring it in because I think it goes a lot with, like, for me, religion. Because all growing up in my faith tradition, I was taught that men and women were equal and that we had equal, importance in our relationships and in the church and in the eyes of God and all of these things, and sex was just another view that showed me that wasn't true.
Yeah.
Like, and it was just really hard because there were other things that I grew up seeing that made me believe that wasn't true. And then going into marriage, sex was just another view of like, that's not true. I'm not an equal.
Yeah.
I don't have, I'm not, if I like sex, then I'm viewed as being unwomanly and this is
Right.
something bad. And if I don't like sex, then I'm normal, right? And it's just to fulfill him. So anyway, just so many mixed messages that make it really hard to be a woman.
Yeah. Absolutely. I don't think I Yeah, it's amazing how many things like hit me in layers where it's like, oh man, racism is systemic and huge and everywhere, and that patriarchal structure is systemic and huge and everywhere. And sometimes we talk about equality and diversity and partnerships, but then when we look at the details, like, oh, there's perpetual power imbalances. And so when you bring that into the sexual realm in that intimate space where there's still an imbalance there, and that's really difficult to navigate when there isn't a pathway or conversations or a framework to make this a true partnership
Yeah.
because it's not where people typically start.
No. And I would like to point out with that conversation, like, I think that in most relationships, especially when we're looking at healthy relationships, like that's not the intention of either
Yeah,
spouse.
I
Like
would
the
agree.
man isn't here being like,
No.
I want this all to be about me. But we've both been raised in this
Yep.
system and this view that makes it hard for both of us to step up and see these things that are happening. And so a lot of the work I do is I want to educate women and empower them so that they
Yep.
can take it to the relationship. Because if you're in a healthy relationship, your partner's probably like, yes, I would love
Yay!
to help you, but I didn't know what to do. And I didn't know where you were coming from and what I was doing. And so that's a lot of what I like to do is help empower women because I think a lot of the issues come from us just not knowing how to interact in a healthier way around this because of these traditions.
I think that's well said. It's often unintentional. We're kind of the byproduct of that upbringing. It's like, well, I don't know another way. It's not where
Yeah.
we want it to be, but what do we do? And
Yeah.
now you're kind of filling that gap.
So then I guess we can move on to number 3. So just this idea that as women, we're caretakers. I mean, from a
Mm,
very young age, you can see this all over, right? Like if a boy hits his brother or sister, it's like, well, boys will be boys.
yep.
We'll try to help him, learn.
Oh,
But
I
if
hate
a
that phrase.
me
Oh,
too. But if a girl hits, it's like, oh my goodness, like
yep.
what? And just from this very young age, we're taught to look out for other people and that our needs aren't as important as others. Like
Yep.
we need to give up things to make other people happy and to take care of them, and that we need to be focusing on other people's needs. And like I said before, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but to the extreme, it can be really damaging, especially for women. And I found this in myself a lot, especially going into motherhood, that I felt like I had a self and I had some things I wanted to do and had a plan for my life before getting married, or if I didn't get married, because that was a huge thing. I wanted to get married. But then suddenly when I got married, it was like, this is the plan of what I should do and how it should look. And
Mm,
suddenly I just tried to fulfill that goal of whatever how I viewed I should be as a wife and a mother.
yeah.
And slowly I didn't have anything that was mine or anything that I was knowing in myself. I would let my kids, like, here's a dumb example, but this was really real. Like, we made some rolls, and who doesn't love bread? Like, I love bread. And all of my kids got a roll and I wanted a roll. And my kids were like, "No, I want your roll," right? And to be a good mom in myself, I felt like to be a good mom,
Oh,
I needed to give up that roll, right?
oh,
But this was a moment where I was learning about these things and I was like, "No, this
nope.
is my role and you already had one."
Way
But
to
just
take a stand.
but it's hard because we
It is.
see this view and a lot of, like, when we talk about Mother's Day, I think it can be hard because we have this this view of perfection and this view of complete selflessness that's actually really unhealthy and
Yep,
harmful to our kids,
yep,
instead of helping our children see, like, we are a person with thoughts and needs and feelings as well,
yep,
and we want to be there to take care of you and help you learn, but I also have boundaries that need to be respected as
yep,
a person. And so
yep,
I think that then all of that lends into what we've already talked about with our sexuality, right? Of just feeling like our spouse is another child that we need to care for, that they have this need that we just need to give up and give ourselves and always be there whenever they need it, instead of seeing ourselves as a partnership and that our sexual relationship is something that we want to make sure we're both feeling fulfilled and loved and seen as full human participants. And like I said before, that's not because necessarily your partner's like, I have this plan that I want her to take care of me and not think about herself. But these are just a lot of the traditions we've grown up with. And
yep,
so it comes natural and it's hard to know how to shift it because this is what we've seen.
yeah. That's so well said. It's all those traditions, and I think there's some realities where, we've had a few kids now, and every time we had a new kid, like I didn't go through a medical event. Like my body didn't go through all those changes, and I didn't have to feed that kid from my own body. And it's like,
You're
like
like, I
there's
don't
just,
want to be touched anymore.
yeah, yeah, she's just done. And so I think there's just a different level of need often for women. And then it's rewarded to like sacrifice yourself and lose yourself and focus on everyone around you. It's rewarded, it's modeled, that's what we know, it's what we see, and it's really easy to get there. And often men don't have that same pressure to do that, to lose yourself. It's like, oh, yep, keep doing your career, keep being you. But for women, it's a lot more difficult to navigate that. And I think that loss of identity is real. It's
Yeah,
huge, especially when
it
you're
is.
adding little humans into the mix. And then your partner just feels like another little human that you got to change their diaper and feed them and clean up after them. It
Not
does,
that much, Matt.
that's good. But it can feel like, yeah, I'm here to serve. And now
Yeah.
who am I had dreams and things I wanted to do. And that often gets lost in that shuffle.
Yeah, and I think it can happen even before we get married. Like, I know I was limited in my choice of education before I got married to find a career that was mom friendly, right? Because this
Oh,
was
yep.
a goal from the beginning. So I think there were lots of things I didn't even consider and think about and explore for myself because of just these traditions. And so I
Yep.
think, but on the flip side, especially as a woman who's given birth and been pregnant, like, those changes and the hard things that happen with our bodies and throughout all those changes can actually be so bonding to figure out what works for a couple to bond in different ways throughout all of those seasons. And so if you're getting to a spot where you're able to find yourself more and kind of shift these ideas, all of those changes, instead of being setbacks or fear of like, oh no, I'm not cleared for 6 weeks, right? What is my husband going to do? It's not about that. It's
Yeah.
about finding ways that you both can find connection and love, and there's no more fear anymore. It takes a lot of the fear out of it that I used to feel because of these harmful beliefs about especially male sexuality.
That's awesome. And it sounds like it's taken a lot of time, a lot of learning, a lot of reflection, a lot of conversation. It's like, oh, we're in a better spot now.
Yeah. Yes. is a beautiful journey, but I wanna kind of make it a lot quicker for other people.
Absolutely.
But then number 4 is just the definition of sex. Like, if someone were to ask you, like, "Did you have sex last night?" I think the first thing that would come to our head is, like, did intercourse happen, right? And
Yep.
studies show just most women cannot reach orgasm through intercourse alone. And that's a fact. But this definition that we have that kind of seems to be the landing point of what creates a sexual encounter and what ends a sexual encounter just leaves out female pleasure. And so
Yep.
I think a huge thing that we can shift is how we define sex and what is included in that definition. You might even choose to change the word you use because maybe sex is too tainted, right? Like making love or whatever you want. But to make sure as a couple you get to talk about what definition is going to work for us in our relationship and what things are included in that definition of sex to make it be about both of us instead of this goal of intercourse and female or sorry, intercourse and male ejaculation, which is often the definition that we have and leaves out women. So it's really hard as a woman when you don't know how your anatomy works and how
Yep.
things go to even know where to begin to enjoy sex with your body and physically because we're not taught about the clitoris and we're not taught about our anatomy and how things work and we can't rely on men to know because they know how do they know more than we do like
I think that is amazing. That definition of sex as intercourse is a male-centric definition. That's what it is. And I think about, I've been a psychologist for over 10 years and helping couples and relationships and doing sexual health. But I don't think I actually saw the full clitoris with all the roots, the full anatomy until like 2 years ago.
right.
And it's like, uh-oh, I'm
Oh.
missing a big piece. Like we don't think about
Yeah,
that. Oh yeah, there's a clitoris in there. It's pretty small though. Don't worry about that one. It's like
it's like
actually
no, no.
it's not. But like that was news to me like 2 years
Yeah.
ago.
Yeah, I always joke with my husband, I'm like, "I need to get a shirt." I think Emily Nagoski talks about this in her book, and I'm like, "I want one." It's like, I need a shirt that has, like, a picture of a vulva and just, like, an arrow, like, "It's here."
Right here.
Like like, this is the crux of female pleasure, and it's not talked about, and we don't know about it, and we kind of we take the penis as being equivalent to the vagina, but,
Right.
like, that is not true, like, it's the vulva, right? The whole vulva is what would be equivalent to the penis, and so I think we just have missed so many of these little key definitions that especially as women, if we don't know our anatomy and we haven't learned what type of things bring us pleasure and can take that to our partner and help them learn and educate them and we can even be educated together. I know depending on faith traditions you can find what is most comfortable for you in doing that exploration, but that's what's gonna help change it. We can't just think that, we just know each other's thoughts and minds of what feels good and what we want. We have to be able to talk about it and explore together and share, and that takes a lot of practice, but it's worth it for sure.
Yeah, and a lot of willingness to learn and to be uncomfortable and seek out resources and like I don't know a lot about a lot of these things. I think for so much of the dialogue, there just hasn't been a focus on women's pleasure and their
Yeah.
anatomy. It just really hasn't been a part of the equation.
Yeah.
And so a lot of these things you probably didn't learn from your parents, probably didn't learn from your friends. Like this dialogue wasn't there.
Yeah.
And so a lot of this is unfortunately like fairly recent
Yeah.
understanding. And there's been some great thinkers and writers and people out there trying to promote that, there's more things going on around sexuality. Let's understand women's bodies and how pleasure works. But it doesn't feel like this is a very old area, even
No.
though we've been having sex for thousands of years.
It's bizarre. I'm like,
It
"Well,
feels
how has
pretty
it
new.
taken this long?" And I don't remember the exact date, but even just like you were saying, like the full anatomy of the clitoris, this is within the last, I don't know, 20 years or less,
Yeah,
like maybe even 10. I can't remember. But it's fairly recent. And it's like,
yeah.
how do we not have this organ that we
I,
know? Like, that's not documented. Like, it's, it's
it's
bizarre and
incredible.
it's time to change.
It
So,
is. Yep. So with those advancements, what are some of the myths that still hang out there that you feel like interfere with men's and women's sexuality that really limit the sense of enjoyment and connection? What are those myths that are still lingering?
I think we covered a lot of them, and the one we kind of touched on and didn't dig into more, is I think this idea of sexual desire as a
Mm,
need for men. I think that that's a really harmful one that has been perpetuated a lot, and when we talk about if we think about it as a need, then it produces this duty response out of women, and also this fear that if this need isn't fulfilled by me, where is it going to be fulfilled? And so I think that this fear has kept, I mean, this is right? Like we're coming out of this, but it's kept women in bounds, right? And
mm,
out of fear to like try to keep her husband close to her and keep him fulfilled. And I think when we shift that, it just gives so much more space for men and women to take initiative and take responsibility for their sexual desire and their arousability and how they channel that within their beliefs. And it also gives space for men and women to really be equal partners and make sexual enjoyment about both of them and
yep.
not just fulfilling one side of the partnership.
I think that's an important shift because I think about as humans, we do have some needs. Like I have a need for breathing and for sleeping and for eating and drinking. If I don't do any of those things, I would die within minutes or days or weeks at most. But you can go without having sex and you're not going to die. Like
You're not
it's
gonna
not a
die.
need at that same level. And so shifting that framework to this is something that can be really connecting and
Yeah.
really pleasurable and meaningful can really improve that experience for both people.
Yeah, and I'm here because I want people to enjoy sex. Like
Yeah.
I want this to be a beautiful part of your relationship, and it can't get there until that fear is taken away and it's made a part that it can be enjoyed and not looked at out of a fear-based lens.
Yep. Yeah, just at a basic nervous system level, like that fear response is incompatible with that sexual response.
Yeah.
And so if we're trying to force it, and we got to get there, and it's scary. It's going to be disruptive. It just doesn't fit together.
No, and I think some of these, like, responses might not even seem very visible to us, like, we might not recognize them, especially for me with my religious culture growing up, like, the way modesty was taught, it was like,
Mm,
I have to cover up in a certain way so that I don't make men have bad thoughts or sin, right? And automatically, that's teaching me that this is an uncontrollable thing for men, and so I think these can be a lot more ingrained than we realize and might
yeah.
not even be recognizing that it's a fear we're feeling
Mm,
versus just like being pushed to do this thing out of duty or we just might not recognize the fears that are feeding into that from a deep sense of from our childhood even.
yeah. Well, maybe we can talk about that because I think about every conversation I have around sexuality. It seems like we talk about religion in there as well, and I think about maybe one of the more common strategies we use as parents or any organization, religious organization, government organization, is we use fear to try to control other people's behavior. And it's quite effective. Um, yeah, we use fear all the time with our kids. Like, don't touch the stove, you'll get burned. Don't cross the street, you'll get hit. And like, our kids are scared, they don't do it. Like, yay, we kept them alive. It's effective. And then at some point, as we start to develop an age, those fear based strategies designed to control behavior kind of break down. And there's some residual impacts to those. But that's a really common strategy, unfortunately, in a lot of religious
Yeah.
traditions, that we use fear to say, we don't want you engaging in sexual behavior. If we can teach you to fear it, maybe we can control that.
Yeah, and I think that I don't blame the former generations, right? And like this has just been tradition for
Yep.
so long. And I mean, we've been talking about how little has been known about female sexuality,
Yeah.
right? Within the past several years, these new developments and understanding is coming more to light and I think that but I think it's up to us. I think it's up to us to figure out a healthy way to see our own sexuality and foster that relationship in a beautiful way with our partner. And after you do that, that's when you're going to be able to pass that down to the next generation. Because even if your words say one thing, your kids like they can feel the deep feelings in your heart. And so we have to take care of ourselves and get to a good place there before we can help shift the culture for our kids and future generations.
Yeah, kids are smart. They learn through modeling. I wish they learned from what I tell them, but they watch what
Right.
I do and how I really feel about these topics. So if I'm uncomfortable around sexuality or talking about things like pornography or masturbation, they learn that, oh, this is a scary
Yeah.
thing. And
Yep.
maybe I can't talk to mom and dad about this, or maybe something is wrong or scary about this, but we have to become comfortable. As mammals, we're really in tune to each other's nervous systems, and we can pick that up. So we can be saying something, but the rest of us is really tuning into what's really going on. And for generations, it's like sex is scary.
Yeah.
And that's the thing we're starting, I feel like just starting to improve. But I think all of us have a responsibility in shifting that for our own fulfillment in our relationships, and hopefully for the next generation to make it easier for them.
Yeah. Yeah. Because they'll be able to tell. If you can foster a relationship you love, a sexual relationship with your partner, your kids will see that. And
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, not actually see it, but they'll feel
I'll sense it.
it. Yes.
So I'm curious, in your journey as you've researched more around sexuality and relationships, has it had an impact on your religious beliefs?
Yeah, it totally has. Kind of what I talked about briefly was just this view that I was taught I was equal in the sight of God, right? And as a woman, but all of these things didn't add up and I didn't feel that. And so I feel like the more I've dug into this topic, along with other topics like modesty culture and things like that, I've really come to believe that I am an equal, and I get to help shift some of those cultural beliefs that are keeping women from living up to their potential for partnership in their marriages and for the equality that I think we can have. And it's been a really good journey to see that, like, I have a place. And even though it's been super frustrating, like one of the most frustrating things that has come from the learning I've done is just how hard it can be for women to learn to feel pleasure in a sexual encounter and also then to foster that. Like that can be a really hard journey, but I've come to really believe that it's designed in that way because we as women do give a lot.
Mm.
We physically every month, right? We menstruate. And
Yep.
if you give birth, if you are pregnant, if you're caring for kids, like you give so much in your body. And I really think that sex is designed, and from my religious perspective I would say that our heavenly parents like designed it this way specifically to make a space where women have to allow somebody else to focus on them, and that can be a really hard
Mhm.
shift because we aren't taught to allow people to focus on us. It's always about serving others, but I think that sex is a space where we need to allow our partner to focus on us. And when we can
Mm.
shift to that, it is mind blowing and just amazing.
I've never thought about that. Can you say more about that? This might be a
Yeah.
divine design where it's like, you know what? You have to let someone else kind of take care of you a little bit, maybe focus on your pleasure a little bit because you don't do this in other areas of your life.
Yeah. And I just think like the way our anatomy is set up, right? Like men can reach from the beginning of arousal to orgasm, it can be like 5 minutes or less, right? And women can do that as well, but usually it takes at least 20 minutes, right? For women to reach climax. And for good sexual encounters, we're talking even maybe 30 to 60 minutes. Like this is a long buildup in time. And I think that from my religious perspective, like I really think it's designed that way because we sacrifice so much in birthing children and in if you decide to nurse, right? Like you are just having this baby on you all the time
Oh,
and giving so much that I think that sex is an area that allows a woman to let someone else focus on her. And I really think that
Wow.
these views that have like shifted it to make it male centered in my religious perspective, and this is my personal belief, but I think it's been taken to the polar opposite of what it's supposed to be, right? Like we've shifted it to be male centered and to be all about
Mm.
them. But if we look at the anatomy, it's usually a lot easier for men to reach orgasm. And so that would then say we need to focus on the person who takes longer. And we talk a lot in like relationship education that it's really important to focus on each other. And I'm not saying that's not true. I think it is. But in sexual encounters, if a woman is only thinking about her partner, she's not going to be able to reach orgasm. Like she has to be able to be present and let the focus be on her. And that's really challenging as a woman. But I think that shifting that culture and allowing sex to be a space where you are cared for can completely change everything. And I'm not saying that men shouldn't enjoy sex and we don't make sure they're enjoying it. Like you haven't been listening if you're taking that away, but like I really think that that's been a huge shift in how I try not to resent how long it can take me, but actually see it as a gift to allow my husband to focus on me.
Kind of speechless. I've never thought about that, heard that. That feels so powerful to me. That just feels right.
Thanks. Yeah, it's definitely not what most people would talk about, but
I
I feel
love that.
yeah,
I
I've come
love
to
that.
believe that there's beauty in how it's designed, even though it can
Mhm.
feel hard and
Yeah.
frustrating.
Wow, I love that. That is such a beautiful perspective. It's designed like this. It should take more time.
Yeah,
Someone can take care of you and focus on you, and you need to focus on you.
yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That feels like a gift. Thank you for sharing that. I love that
Thank you.
message. Love that. So, in your journey, just a couple of things. What would you say has been maybe most surprising or challenging or rewarding in all the things you've learned?
I think the thing that has most challenging and surprising is how little we all know about female anatomy.
Yeah.
Like growing up as a woman, it's like I didn't even know the clitoris existed until I was in my 20s or even married, right? Like
Oh,
it's forever. And just I think there was a quote I heard years ago, and I don't remember who said it, but she just made this comment that, like, it's not that female sexuality is hard to understand, it's just that we don't know enough about it. And I have really taken that, like, I don't think it's complicated. I don't think that female sexuality is complicated. What makes it seem complicated is that it's never talked about and taught. And so
yep,
I think that we in this generation, we can shift that and we can make it so that it's not scary, so that it's not dirty. Because that's a lot of views we have too. We're like, "Whoa, well, what's in a woman's vagina? It has gotta be dirty," right? Like, it's not. It's part of our body, and we can help shift that for us and ourselves to see our bodies as good and to help our kids then also take that and be like, "Oh, men and boys and girls and women have different parts in their bodies and they're all good and they're different and this is what they are." And we know that as a fact instead of being
yep.
like, where can I find information about my sexuality, right? Like,
I love it. That's great. So you've worked so hard to learn, put some things together. I'd love for people to know more about your resources, how to find you, all the things you're working on so people can benefit from all this that you put together.
no, thank you. Yeah, you can find me. The Ladies Talking Love podcast is my podcast that I have. And then you can find me on Instagram at ladies.talkinglove. Ladiestalkinglove.com is my website. And in February, I'm actually going to be launching my first women's sexuality course. And we're going to dive deep into
Yay!
a lot of these topics. And I'm going to give you resources to really dive in and learn and shift these beliefs. And you'll get to have also like live Q&As with me to answer some of these questions and things that come up because this can be a hard journey and I don't want anybody to feel like they have to do it alone. I'm not going away, and so I'd love to have you join the course and learn together, and I'm just excited to be able to share some of the things I've learned so that it doesn't have to be a challenging journey for you and your partner.
Wonderful. Well, I'm excited for you and all the work you put together, and also all the people that are going to benefit from your resources and those that have already benefited. And I learned a lot from you in this chat and the chat we had before. So thank you for your thoughts and your outlook on this. It just think you present these ideas in a way they're just really accessible and they're not threatening. And it's like we can do this. Like there's things we can learn, and this is good. Like it's okay. Let's
It's
go to
not
work.
scary.
Yeah, and the
No,
outcome
thank
isn't like
you.
we got to do tough bad things. It's like actually we're going to learn how to do pleasurable, meaningful things. Like there's a benefit to this. There's a purpose to it. So I love how you present all of this.
Oh, thank you. Oh, and I'd like to add, I'm going to send you a link to one of my free resources that really dives
Oh
into
yeah,
the part about losing yourself as a woman. And I just share my 5 steps that I've used to really find myself being a mom, being in motherhood, and to make sure that I can take care of, I can have a self to bring to my relationship. So I'll send you that if people want to download that free
wonderful.
resource.
So needed. Thank you so much for the chat and for the resources. It was great to have this conversation with you.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks for listening. Please remember to rate and subscribe. I know you might be facing some issues in your life or know someone who is. Issues like anxiety, challenges in dealing with emotions, or other compulsive behaviors like unwanted pornography. And I know it's tough to talk to people about problems. Difficult to stare those obstacles down that we face in life and to really know how to deal with them. It's hard to know what to say and when to say it. And then when that moment you finally reach out to family and friends happens, sometimes it falls flat. I haven't found many programs teaching effective strategies like mindfulness, how to improve relationships, and ways to address unwanted pornography viewing through research-supported principles. So whether you simply want to help with a problem like unwanted pornography, difficulty responding to emotions, or just want to understand the world of someone struggling with porn a little better, head over to lifeafterpornography.com and get in on the next training. There you'll learn the exact same strategies individuals addicted to pornography used to transform their lives by implementing principles from evidence-based treatment shown effective in research for reducing unwanted pornography viewing. You'll learn the secrets, the myths, the enemies to recovery, and the LAP framework for dealing with unwanted porn viewing that we call WAVE. If that's something that interests you, click the link in the description or just head over to lifeafterpornography.com. I'm Dr. Cameron Staley. See you on the inside.